Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I still have too much free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Today's ink is by Diamine, here in the plastic 30 milliliter bottle. Ancient Copper, which really is a genuine copper color. It's an orange that borders on red and borders on brown. It's really copper. Private Reserve's Copper Burst really is just more of a brown. This evokes copper. And all the tests were done in this MonteVerde Impressa with a 1.1 millimeter stub nib. Let's check out the chromatography. Now, as you can see, there's this darker bit down at the bottom, which may make one believe that there's some water-resistant properties. However, most Diamine inks are not terribly water-resistant, and this one, overall, I'd say isn't either. It's kind of patchy, as you'll see in the paper test, but it has some interesting components here. You can see it goes into a more genuine, straightforward red, and then up into this rich, dark orange, somewhat of a lighter orange here in the corner, and then this dark, rich band up at the top, which is just really gorgeous. But let's check out the paper tests. Starting from the top down in density, Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. Now, as you can probably see, this is a genuine copper color. This looks like, you know, like a copper confectioner's bowl or something. It's gorgeous, and the shading is absolutely fantastic. Hopefully that'll come through on camera. Now, the dry time was a bit long, but this is a fairly broad stub. It's not the broadest, but it's not tiny. So 24 seconds to dry. I said good flow, rich color, good shading, no bleed feather spread, slow-ish drying, which will be a bit of a theme with this ink, and looks great in a stub. Now, the water test is extremely patchy, as you can see. Where it stayed very clearly, but where it left, it really left. And as you might be able to see in this close-up, the paper did start to come apart. And my dogs are freaking out. Up next is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter, where look at how rich and dark it got on this paper. I mean, that's gorgeous. The shading gets even more pronounced because of how dark it appeared on this paper. I mean, look at the word dog. That's just beautiful. It goes from sort of like a burnished copper to a polished copper. It's a beautiful color. Great shading. I love it on Rhodia. Dry time was slightly improved, but it's still a bit on the long side. As I said here, great rich color, fantastic shading, no bleed feather spread, longish dry times, and potential for ghosting or show through, because it is a bit of a dark ink. It's particularly darker on this paper, so if you're very sensitive to that, maybe just keep that in mind. Here, the water test is again a bit patchy, but it also didn't stay quite as much as it did on the other paper, so it's pretty washable. I'll say that. Up next is Tomoe River Paper, where, yeah, I said epic dry times. It was 29 seconds. But look at that shading. It's still great. It's still very coppery. It has that richness to it. It has fantastic shading. I mean, look at the word jumps and quick. That's just beautiful. But yeah, no bleed feather spread. Said great vibrancy, because I think it does look very vibrant. The water test was not great. That's not very readable where it's gone. It's very gone, and the paper did not start to come apart. And even where it still remained, it's fairly light. So some potential for show through, because this is a very thin paper. So next is standard Copier Paper, where again 11 seconds, so longish dry time, no bleed feather spread, good degree of shading, bold and bright, because you still get shading on this paper. It might not be quite as pronounced, but it's there. It's definitely there, like in the word Impressa and over. It's still a, oh, dry time. That looks good. But yeah, so it's a little bit on the longish side. The water test is okay. It's not great. We've seen better. It's fairly readable, but not ideal. It did start to dye the paper around it just a bit. Yeah, I'd say on a scale of 1 to 10, it got maybe a 5. Maybe. Up next is Mead Notebook Paper, where it took 4.5 seconds to dry, which is a bit long on this paper, especially considering how quickly it was absorbed and how much it feathered. I mean, if you look at the word feathers, I wrote that because as I was writing this, it just exploded into feathers. It did not react well with this paper at all. Yeah, so long for paper dry times, terrible feathering, there is bleed, and it's pretty bad. It might do a bit better in a smaller pen, but I'm not entirely sure, because even on the thinner down strokes, it's still feathered. So, and the water test was terrible. Again, if I had to give it a 1 out of 10, I'd say that's a 1.5 maybe, because there's still ink there, but good luck reading it. I mean, that's a mess. And lastly is Moleskine Notebook Paper, if my camera will focus. So 6 seconds, that is a bit on the long side still, but if you look, you still get shading. You see in the word Impressa and Ancient and Diamine. But yeah, so longest dry times, and I said comparatively minimal bleed, feather, and spread. Because there is some feathering, like you can see in the C and copper. And you see these little feathers shooting off. But it's not all over the place. It's really just the odd feather that peeks out. And considering this is a 1.1 stub, that's really not bad. In a smaller nib, this could probably do fairly well. Now, the water test was kind of explodey. I mean, it feathered like crazy, but it didn't dye the paper so much. It did a little, but not much. It's not the easiest to read, but where it went in, it stayed in there. I mean, that's fairly dark. So, I don't know. Again, it might do well in a thinner writing pen. But so there's Diamine Ancient Copper. I think it's a beautiful coppery ink. It's really the only ink I've seen so far that really hits that note of copper, and it does so beautifully. It shades fantastically on Copier Paper or on Rhodia paper. It's well behaved. It looks great in a stub, and while it may not be the most water resistant ink, it's also not the worst. So, for your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And so long. Have a good day.